Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com, setting the record straight about climate. This video discusses the accuracy of climate modeling at the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Boulder, Colorado. I rode my bike to NCAR on Saturday in a blizzard. They're responsible for many of the advances in weather modeling which allowed prediction of the huge snowstorm which hit that day. I've done contract programming work for them on their weather and climate models. Their weather models are excellent, but what about their climate models? NCAR has a museum with lots of exhibits about climate and a few about their area of actual expertise, which is weather. One of the climate exhibits purports to show that climate models, drawn in red, precisely match the surface temperature record, drawn in black. The surface temperature record shows rapid warming from 1880 to 1940, slower warming from 1940 to 1980, followed by very rapid warming from 1980 to the present. So how accurate is the surface temperature record which I just showed you? Well, it was very different from a graph that was published by NCAR in 1974, which showed sharp cooling from 1940 to 1970 and showed that 1970 was actually cooler than 1870. The graph on the right overlays the current NASA graph in red on top of the NCAR graph from 1974 in black. You can see that NASA has actually erased the 1940 to 1970 cooling. The 1940 to 1970 cooling has clearly been erased from the surface temperature record, but was it real? Well, in 1974, NCAR's two top scientists, Stephen Schneider and Walter R. Roberts, said it was real. The Boulder newspaper reported that they said, observers of the global climate at the National Center for Atmospheric Research believe the favorable weather of the past 15 years is about to give way to a period of unstable climate, crop losses, food shortages, and death by starvation for millions. Underlying Schneider's ideas on food shortages is the knowledge that the world is moving into a period of cooler temperatures. They did believe the Earth was cooling. And Newsweek reported in 1975 in an article titled The Cooling World that scientists wanted to melt the polar ice caps to stop cooling. So, what did other scientists believe? In 1961, the New York Times reported a unanimous consensus among scientists that Earth was cooling. And in 1970, the New York Times reported that US and Soviet scientists were worried about ominously thickening Arctic sea ice and a new ice age. In the late 1970s, scientists said that global cooling is indisputable. Dr. J. Murray Mitchell of the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration says the world has been cooling off in the long run. On the average, it's cooled down by something like 1 degree Fahrenheit or half a degree Celsius, and that cooling began around World War II. And the New York Times reported no end in sight to the 30-year cooling trend in the Northern Hemisphere. So what other physical evidence do we have of the 1940 to 1970 global cooling? Well, in 1963, the Canberra Times reported that Norway's glaciers were becoming thicker after 200 years of melting. Compared that with 25 years earlier, when the glaciers of Greenland were rapidly melting and the glaciers of both Norway and Greenland were facing the possibility of catastrophic collapse. The physical evidence of glaciers shows that the 1940 to 1970 global cooling period was very real. NCAR's 1974 version of the graph was correct. So why did scientists change it to the currently incorrect version? The 1940 to 1970 version of NASA's temperature graph is clearly wrong. But what about more recent temperatures which show rapid warming continuously since 1970? Well, this is a huge change from 4 years ago when a post 2000 global warming pause was central to the IPCC climate report. The data was radically changed in the months ahead of the Paris Climate Conference, and NOAA's principal scientist, John Bates, blew the whistle on how this was done outside of agency procedures. Clearly, it was done for political reasons ahead of the Paris conference. So, was the post 2000 global warming hiatus real? Well, satellites which measure the troposphere show that it was real, whereas NASA's surface temperatures show rapid warming since the year 2000. So, which one is right? Well, global warming theory is based on troposphere temperatures, which are measured by satellites, whereas surface temperatures tend to be contaminated by poorly placed thermometers, like this one in Melbourne, right in the middle of asphalt. It's clear that the surface temperature record is not reliable, particularly during the periods 1940 to 1970 and since the year 2000. So back to the original claim that NCAR climate models match the surface temperatures. Well, this is not a coincidence. Climate models are backfitted with tens of thousands of parameters to match the surface temperature record. And the surface temperature record has been altered to match global warming theory and the needs of politicians. This is junk science at its worst. Please visit Toto on the web at realclimatescience.com. He's been pulling back the curtain on junk science for a long time.